Welcome back to my series on chess opening theory. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the Tarrasch Endgame, which can occur in the Tarrasch variation of the French defense. So the French defense is when we have the moves e4, e6, d4, d5, and the Tarrasch variation is when white now plays knight d2. So there are a number of choices that black can now play, but the most mainstream choice at the moment is pawn to c5, with knight to f6 being a decent alternative. But we're looking at pawn to c5. And in this game, white played e takes d5. White could also go for the knight gf3 move order as well. But instead we have e takes d5. Black could take back with the pawn, but generally, these days, black does not do that, as it can lead to an isolated queen pawn position, and black might not want that, especially since black doesn't have that much aggression, so it can be tricky to defend that. So black's often taking with the queen. White now plays knight gf3. Black takes this pawn, getting rid of a pawn in the center. Like, the point isn't really to win the pawn, it's more just to get rid of an annoying central pawn. White plays bishop to c4, and there are three main choices where black can retreat their queen. But I'm mainly looking at the most popular choice, which is to d6. And here, white castles. One thing that I have not mentioned before is basically why white doesn't play knight e4 right away. The reason is just because this check can be annoying, and then one of these knights will have to go back to d2 just to defend this bishop over here. So that's why white generally castles here. Similar deal if white plays queen knight b3, hitting the pawn. Black can still give this check, be annoying, force a knight to d2. So that is why in this position white castles, and black will have time to control the e4 square by playing knight to f6. Then white usually plays knight to b3 to try to win back the pawn. Black plays knight c6. White takes. Black takes. And normally, white will take with the knight. However, in this game, which features the Tarrasch endgame, white takes with the queen. And this is kind of the start of the Tarrasch endgame. And there are three main moves for black that have been played, but they all kind of have a similar result. For example, black could play bishop to d7, but then white could play bishop to f4, and then black has nothing better to do than to trade queens. That is the only move that has ever been played in the database, and I don't blame black for doing that. It makes a lot of sense. And with a6, just similar thing. White develops the bishop, and black has to trade queens. Now you might be wondering, well, can't black evade the queen trade? Well, the problem is that if black spends time moving their queen to some passive square, then white will get too much of an initiative. White will get too much pressure on black. For example, if black were to play queen c7, then white could again just develop their bishop with tempo. That's not so fun. Queen a5, white can just develop their rook and be eyeing this square here with their queen. That's why this queen wants to stay on this diagonal. I could try to castle kingside, and basically white could be like, no castling for you, no. And then black could be like, okay, I guess I gotta move my queen back. And then white's like, haha, I'll give you a check. Black's like, okay, I guess I gotta block that. And then white's like, haha, I'll take. And then, you know, taking with the queen, there's yuck, this is no fun. And of course, taking with the knight, there's another problem, which of course is that this guy will fall. So that's no good either. So that's if black tried retreating with queen to c7. Queen to c6 has similar issues. In fact, there's a very cool trick here that white could now play, which is bishop to h6. Being like, haha, this bishop's not getting out. If this bishop gets out, then I will just take this pawn. And if you take this, then whoopsies, this is not good, you know? This poor king is stuck over here. Like, this is very, very unpleasant. Like, a game might continue with, like, bishop d7. That's the best move according to the engine. Maybe eyeing threats over here, or just trying to develop a piece. But, you know, white could just continue. Like, maybe go after, you know, things along this. And, you know, black would be like, no, please, I want to trade. And white's like, no, I don't want to trade anymore. This is too fun. And then black would be like, well, I guess I'll try castling queenside. And white's like, roar, come my pieces, roar. And yeah, this is unpleasant. Like, basically, if you try avoiding the end game, white will just destroy you. Like if white is strong enough and understands piece activity, controlling the center, how to attack, all that stuff, white will just destroy you. So, like, any of these moves are fine, but taking the queen is probably the most straightforward and the most popular. So it's the one I chose to look at. And then white took back, and this is the start of the Tarrasch endgame. So for this game, with the white pieces, we have Grandmaster Vladimir Akopian, not to be confused with Grandmaster Var Akopian, who was featured in this series before. So Grandmaster Akopian is an Armenian American Grandmaster who originally played for Armenia. He, like, in the past, he won the World Under 16 and Under 18 and World Junior tournaments back in the late 80s. And let's see. Also won the Armenian Chess Championship multiple times. And also he was part of the Olympiad team, like the Armenian Olympiad team, multiple times, and they often won first. They often won the Olympiad. And there was also a World Team Chess Championship, I believe, that they also won. But he has since come to the US, and he currently plays for America. And in the early 2010s, his FIDE rating was in the 2700s, which is very impressive. That basically means that he became a super grandmaster, at least for a while. And let's see, around the time that this game was played, I think he was around 2600, maybe 2650, something like that. Still very strong, even in 2000. And with the black pieces, we have Grandmaster Alexei Shirov, who is a Grandmaster from Latvia. And I forgot to mention the previous two times that he's been featured in this series, that he actually has been playing for Spain for most of his chess career. But he's very well known for his attacking style and also for his endgame technique. And we're going to be seeing some of that endgame technique in this game. It's going to be quite a bit of fun. Like, endgames don't have to be boring, and Grandmaster Shirov is going to show us how to go about playing this endgame. And let's see, he's a former number 2 in the world. He has I like to think of him as sort of the spiritual successor to Mikhail Tal, as they were both originally from Riga, Latvia. Although I would say that Grandmaster Shirov's attacks are a lot more sound. Like, if you put them in an engine will generally be nodding its head going, yeah, this is all good. This is all cool stuff. If this works, you can play like this if you want. You know, the engine doesn't yell at him, whereas it might yell at Tal. Anyway, this game was played at the Torneo Magistral tournament in Merida, Mexico. It is an old tournament, so I didn't find that much information about it, but I did find some. Like, basically, it was a 4-player double round robin that featured Grandmaster Shirov, Grandmaster Akopian, Grandmaster Judith Polgar, as well as Grandmaster Gilberto Hernandez. And Grandmaster Shirov actually won this event, and, well, we're going to see some of his technique here. And more information about the players and the event can be found in the video description. Now, back to the game. So, in this position, even though it's an endgame, that doesn't mean that black has to play for a draw. Black can, you know, try to be active, try to push for or a win, try to get some space, try to create some imbalances on the board. But the first thing black needs to do is develop their pieces. So black plays bishop c5, saying, hey, get that knight out of there. I don't like that knight on that square. That knight's too strong in d4. So white played knight b3, being like, haha, get your bishop out of here. And here, a decent alternative, which is recommended in Anish Giri's French defense course, is to play bishop to b6. But black instead played bishop to e7, which is also good. This is a fine move. There is nothing wrong with this. White played bishop to f4. Black played bishop to d7, developing their final piece. Maybe black wants to castle, maybe not. It kind of depends on the situation, depends on black's plan, as this is an endgame. Although at the same time, there are two rooks, so there are still some potential attacking opportunities that black has to be mindful of. Anyway, in this position, white realizes that their light square bishop is actually very silly on this square. Like, what is it even doing? It's just staring at two pawns. This bishop's not doing anything here. White puts their bishop on e2. The engine quite likes this. However, in the process, the bishop gave up the d5 square. So black's like, okay, I'll just put my knight on d5, improve the positioning of my knight. And then white's like, I'm not too worried about that. I'll put my bishop on g3. I'm not scared of you. And black's like, oh, really? You're not scared? Okay, I'll just push my pawn then. And white's like, well, okay, maybe I'll make some air for my bishop. And black goes, roar, move your bishop, move it. So notice that black is taking some space on the king side. That is the side of the board where black is strongest. Like, black's got 4 pawns here versus white's 3. So black wants to push these pawns. As Jose, like former world champion Jose Capablanca would say, advance your majority. That is an important principle in the endgame. So white plays bishop to h2. I guess white didn't want to put their bishop on e5. I think it looks okay, but maybe allowing f6 to come with tempo followed by e5. Maybe white didn't like that idea. Yeah, like this bishop is pretty strong on this diagonal. It is doing some stuff here. Like maybe stopping rook from coming to b8, things like that, or more importantly, king from going to b8 after black now plays the move castles queenside. And so in this position, white plays the move rook f d1 because white is probably thinking, I should put the other rook on c1 and push this pawn down the board. So black's like, I'm a bit scared of that. I'm a bit scared of this pawn coming down with tempo. So I'm going to move my knight back a bit. I'm a little bit worried about that. Now, objectively, the engine doesn't really like spending a moving this knight like this. It's like it's probably happy to just wait for the pawn to come down and then move the knight. Like, I kind of agree. I do feel that the knight was very strong on d5 and, you know, like maybe provoke the pawn first and then move and instead push like the g pawn or like push some of these kingside pawns, stuff like that. But that's not what happened in the game. White now play knight to a5. Black played bishop to b4, being like, you're probably planning to play bishop f3 and go after this pawn, which can't really move. So I'm going to like get that knight out of here. And White's like, okay, I'll put my knight on c4. And Black's like, you know what? I know that trading pieces makes it more likely that the game might be a draw, but at the same time, this knight is better than my knight. My knight, it's kind of a bit passive, so I don't really like that this knight isn't really doing a whole lot and might even be in my way, whereas this knight looks very strong. So it's like, okay, I'll trade. This is fine. And so White took back, and Black made Ben Feingold very angry by playing pawn to f6, but Black has a very simple idea, which is to keep pushing their pawns on the king side, but also push the pawn to e5, where it will take this bishop out of the game. And like try to weaken this strong bishop as it's controlling some important squares. It's making it harder for Black's king to participate. So White plays pawn to c3, just kind of thinking a similar thing, being like, I want to push my majority as well. Black's like, okay, I'm going to drop my bishop back maybe put it over here. Here, like, it could have gone to c5 as well, but that might result in similar outcome, stuff like that. We have king to f1, pawn to e5. White also makes Ben Feingold very angry by playing f3. Black's like, you know what? I think I want to trade my bishop for yours if it comes there, as that's a pretty strong bishop. And I've done a pretty good job with my pawns of putting them all on dark squares where your light square bishop cannot get them. So White plays bishop g1. Black accepts the trade. Like, notice that if Black put their bishop on like c7 or something, that would be very passive. Also, putting the bishop along this diagonal would also be a bit funny because these pawns are kind of in the way of Black's own bishop. So Black's like, my bishop is very bad. I don't really like my bishop anymore. I'm just gonna get rid of this problem piece, and I'm gonna use this bishop instead to win. So in this position, Black now plays bishop to a4, which is a pretty neat idea. The idea is just to provoke pawn coming forward to b3. Like, in this position, if White instead plays rook takes d8 and Black plays rook takes d8, then Black's rook will arrive on d2 and be ready to wreak some havoc in White's position. Like, maybe cut White's kings out and maybe win some pawns. And so that would be really bad for White. White should not allow this. Like, earlier I said that generally the players will often be controlling the center, fighting for control of the center, because that's where your pieces are strongest. Well, rooks are probably the one major exception to that, because rooks control the exact same number of squares, exactly 14 squares, regardless of where they are on the board. The only thing that matters is if the rook is being blocked by something. So rooks, they don't necessarily care about being in the center. They kind of just want to be where the action is. And the 7th rank is generally where rooks are happiest, as there they can often attack the king, they can often restrict the opponent's king, and they can often win enemy pawns. They can get behind enemy pawns and take them from behind, things like that. But anyway, this is not what happened in the game. Instead, White played pawn to b3, kicking the bishop away. Like, otherwise, White would have to move their rook, and White really doesn't want to do that. So Black's like, okay, I provoked the pawn coming to b3. I think that's good. I'll put my bishop on c6. This is kind of the best square for it at the moment, where it's out of the way of my rook and all that kind of stuff. White plays king f2. Black plays king c7. An interesting thing to note is to just look at the king side pawns. Look at how all of Black's pawns, they're taking space, but they're also on squares where White's bishop cannot get at them, whereas White's pawns are on squares where Black's bishop can get at them. So, you know, this is ideal for if Black's bishop wants to attack these pawns. So anyway, White now plays bishop to d3. Black plays rook d6, getting ready to double up. White plays bishop to e4, or offering a bishop trade. Black chooses to accept it. Black could have also played rook h d8. White could take like this, bishop takes, rook takes. Like, this would also be completely fine. Right? But this is not what happened in the game. Instead of going for piece activity, instead of going for this active rook, Black instead went for damaging White's pawn structure, which can also be very helpful in the endgame. So Black took like this, White took like this, Black took with their king, White took like this, Black played rook to c8, hitting this pawn on c3, and White played the move rook d1 check, which looks very natural, but is actually inaccurate. White actually needed to play the move pawn to c4, and it's pretty interesting why. Alright, so Black played king to e6, and White now defended their pawn with the move rook to d3, and Black now played pawn to b5, stopping the c4 advance from occurring, like stopping this from ever happening. What's interesting is if back in this position, if here White tried pawn to c4, then Black could still go pawn to b5, and since the rook is not on a1, it's not defending the pawn on a2, so pawn takes results in rook check, and basically if king f3, for example, then rook takes, And this pawn structure is just very unhappy. So that is part of the reason why rook d1 check was inaccurate, because basically white needs to play pawn to c4, and basically by moving the rook away from a1, it makes pawn to c4 no longer a real possibility. So anyway, that is not what happened in the game though. Instead we had a rook d3 and black prevents pawn from coming to c4. Black's kind of stopping white from advancing their majority. White plays pawn to g3, realizing that this pawn on h4 is quite annoying. It's preventing white's king from getting in here. It's also kind of dominating two pawns at once. Like, this pawn was doing a lot of work. So pretty good pawn. Also hard to get at because of the pawn on e4, kind of obstructing the rook from getting at the h4 square. So we have takes, the rook takes, and black's like, okay, I'll just push my other pawn. I'll just keep advancing my majority. Rook f3, black's like, okay, I'll throw my pawn to b4. Or are you going to take it, or are you going to let me take this guy over here like that? And white's like, no, I'm going to play pawn to c4 now. But notice that this pawn is kind of doing what the h pawn was doing. It's kind of stopping the a and b pawns from going forward. This pawn's kind of ramming into them. It's kind of acting like that the guy at the traffic light who is standing in front of you and the light changes and he's on his phone and he will not walk forward. So, well, it's kind of like that. But not really. Probably more like a football player stopping two football players. I don't know. I don't play football. Anyway, black plays rook h8. Like, the idea of rook d8 with rook d4, that probably looks more intuitive, but black's idea is better in my opinion, because black wants to use both their rook and their king. Black doesn't want to just use their rook. Black needs to use all their pieces in order to win this game. So white plays rook king to e3. Black plays rook to h4. White plays king to d3. Black plays rook to f4. White plays king back to e3. And one thing I will mention really quick is that if, in this position, white played rook takes f4, trading rooks, then this would actually be a winning king and pawn endgame for black. Because if white now tries king d4, I can just stand in the way with king d6. And if white gives this check, black just stands here, and this pawn is just an eternal nuisance for white to deal with. And pushing the h-pawn doesn't help, because then white would have two annoying pawns to deal with that would be going up the board. So this would be winning for black. Like, white will eventually have to make some sort of concession here. For example, if white goes king like here, then black just starts pushing their pawn, and white will have to move their king, and black will move their king and get their king into, get their king over here and kill this pawn over here while white is busy dealing with that. So, for example, f3 here, let's see, maybe push this guy first here, push this guy here, something like this. Here, something like that. I don't know if this is fully accurate, but basically something of this manner, where basically, black might end up giving up the kingside pawns to trade for these two pawns, but in the process, black could get behind over here and kill these guys. Eyes from behind. White will be distracted on the king side while black's king could sneak behind and get those guys. I don't know if this is exactly perfectly accurate, but at least the first few moves were. Anyway, back in this position, that was not what happened in the game. Instead, white played king to e3, being ready to trade like this. And one thing that's very interesting is that if black trades, this is actually terrible for black. In fact, it will be white who would be winning, because this protected passed pawn is a nuisance. Black will always be distracted by this protected passed pawn. Black will never be able to capture it. Undermining white's pawn structure doesn't help. Black will simply never be able to take this pawn. Black will always be distracted by it. White's king will be able to infiltrate and get in and win the game and win black's pawns. So this trade here would actually be very bad for black. But again, that is not what happened in the game. Instead, in this position, black just starts moving their king, trying to get it into the d4 square. White plays rook f2. And black suddenly realizes, oh, wait a minute. King c5 doesn't work. Because of king c5, rook takes, e takes, king f3, king d4. White can play h4 here. Takes. I can try h3. Here, h2. Oh, wait, hang on. Mess something up. Oh, actually, no, I didn't mess something up. The engine prefers king f3. It's a bit interesting. So I should probably just follow what the engine says. But anyway, here, takes. And there's just one problem about all this. This pawn, how am I going to get rid of it? Oh no! I'm not going to be able to push this guy up the board because this king can just stand on f1 and be like, ha ha, you can't, push your pawn, ha ha. Whereas this guy, he could get running at any moment. Like this guy might actually be, oopsies, faster than this guy. So that's why black didn't do that. That's why black realized in this position that king c5 doesn't actually work. Probably very hard to calculate that far ahead, but this is Grandmaster Shirov we're talking about, and he's very well known for his technique here. So black's like, okay, I'm going to figure out some other way in. I'm going to just go back to e6. And white's like, okay, do you want to draw? And black's like, no, I'm still thinking. White's like, are you sure? Do you want to draw? And black's like, I'm still thinking. White's like, are you sure? Do you want to draw? Black's like, I'm still thinking. You want to draw? Okay, no, I should mention that in an actual game, you should not offer a draw every move. That would be against the rules. That would be considered distracting your opponents. So don't do that. Not only is it rude, it's against FIDE rules, but this is a joke. So this is just a joke. So black's like, no, I'm still thinking. I'm thinking about something. White's like, are you sure you want to draw? I'm still thinking. You want to draw? I'm still thinking. Draw? Still thinking. Draw? Still thinking. Draw? Still thinking. Draw? Still thinking. Come on, you know you want to draw. No, I'm still thinking. Draw? Draw? No. No, I don't want to draw. And white's like, oh, poopy. What has happened here? And black's like, I know what's happened here. I realized what I needed. Black realized that they need to advance. They need to win on all sides of the board if they're going to win this game. So black pushed, their queenside pawns, their a pawn in particular, before getting into this formation. So white tries giving this check. Black's like, that check doesn't do anything. In fact, that check kind of makes your position a bit worse. You got too many things to hold on to here. Too many things to stop. And white's like, okay, I'll just deal with these pawns. Black's like, all right, I got the H pawn. I took here. Take. And then here, if white takes like this isn't so good because this pawn structure is not great. Like these pawns all over here, they're very tricky to deal with. Black would just play g4, just advance like this. Just be very happy with a rook trade here because the king's much too far away to stop the pawn. So instead, white took back with the pawn because, this will be connected pass pawns. White's going to try to use those for counterplay. So black moves their king forward. White plays rook b8. Black pushes their pawn to g4. We have rook to g8. Rook to g3, king to e2, trying to bring the king over, deal with this play over here. King to d4, king to f2, rook here with check, king to g2, rook like this. And here in this position, there is only one move that has any hope of saving the game for white. If you want, you can pause the video and try to find it. Try to figure out how white can go about trying to be as resilient as possible. Or like, what is the best way forward for white? What is the best way for white to try to get a draw here? Like, this is tricky. This is a very tricky exercise. Like, I don't blame white for not finding it in the game, especially since, you know, this is move 65 and, you know, they're probably both low on time. But I will reveal the move in 3, 2, 1. So white's best try is to play the move rook to f8. And if black now plays king takes e4, so that, you know, this pawn will stay defended, white could then try pawn to c5, just push this guy forward. And if black tries going after this pawn, white can play pawn to b4. And if black takes this pawn, then white can take this pawn, and black can take this, and this is a book draw. Like, these two pawns, they're not good enough to win. And this is a draw that you can find in endgame books. If they were connected passed pawns, then they would be a much nastier threat for white to deal with. But there is a technique that white can use to draw this. I'm not going to show the technique because I honestly don't remember it. I need to review it. But this is a book draw. But that is not what happened in the game. And also, black doesn't have to quite play like this. Like, black could instead, back in this position, black doesn't have to play rook takes b4. Black could instead play the move, let's see. Oh, I think it was actually this position where rook takes b4 would be played. Black could instead just play king c6 and try maybe just pushing these pawns up the board, stuff like that. Like maybe push this guy, then push this guy up one, and then push the pawns. Like this king does do a fairly good job of just stopping the advancements of these pawns. Like black can push for a win like this. But there would still be a game to play. Like this position here, objectively, it's probably a draw, but it's not a book draw at least. There's still some uncertainty left on the board. There's still a game to be played. But anyway, this is not what happened in the game. Instead, white played the move rook to d8 check. But this move doesn't really help white, as black's king is probably happy to get to the king side anyway. It's probably happy to be the one that take this pawn. White plays rook to d2, maybe hoping to cut this king away from defending against these passed pawns. Black plays rook f3, hitting the b pawn. White plays rook b2, defending it from behind, as pushing the pawn might actually result in rook b3, followed by maybe rook b4, something like that, and then maybe like king d3, just like if the rook comes to c2, things like that. Just getting ready to take some pawns. Although, actually, no, that might lose. Well, maybe king here and then king there if the rook goes back to c1, things like that. Because then the rook is out of squares, and then this rook can take that and then go back and hide on b8 and stop the b pawn, and then king and three pawns can work together against this king. Stuff like that. Anyway, rook b2 to defend this pawn from behind. Rooks do very often belong behind passed pawns. That's another important endgame principle. We have rook c3, getting behind this passed pawn, and keeping an eye on this guy as well. We have pawn to b4, rook takes c4. Now there's only one passed pawn to deal with over here. Pawn to b5, rook to c7, as ideally you don't necessarily want to be defending on the promotion square if you don't have to. It's better to defend on a square just a little bit in front. So like this. King g3, pawn to f5. We have rook to b4 check. I'm not sure if this really is an inaccuracy since white was losing before, so I don't think it makes much difference. Black just wants to bring their king around. Rook b5 check. Like, the difference between -5 and -7, there is very little practical difference. It's just losing and also losing. Anyway, king h4, king f6, rook to b1, and black's like, okay, you won't let my king get to g5, I'll just advance like this. And white's like, I'm out of moves, I don't have much I can do. And black's like, okay, go my pretty pawn, go my pretty pawn. White plays king g3, black's like, aha, now I get in. King g5, king g2, pawn to e2, king to f2. Black's like, okay, now I have time to support my pawn. Notice that if the rook had been blocking in front of, like, on the promotion square, then white could now queen, but white now doesn't have time for that, so that's pretty important to keep in mind for that. And basically white played king e1 here, but there wasn't really much that white could do. Like rook b1, for example, doesn't work because there's just pawn to g3 check. And if king g3, then make a queen, takes, and then this rook just cleans up the pawn and just king and rook checkmate. That's all there is to it. So instead, that's not what happened in the game. Instead, we had king e1, pawn to g3, rook to b3, pawn to f4, and it was in this position that white resigned, as there is no way that white can stop all these pawns. Like, maybe white could get one queen, but black will get two queens, you know? And, well, two queens are better than one. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed the game. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye for now.